There is a paradox at work in the northern regions of the world. All across the Nordic countries and Canada, some of the happiest countries in the world, people continue to commit suicide at a rate that far exceeds what we would expect from such a happy country. Could it be because humans are more connected to Mother Nature than we would like to admit? Humankind has long since been working to separate ourselves from Mother Nature and the natural rhythm of the Earth. From air conditioning and heating to space travel and exploration, humanity has been focused on moving away from a dependence on our planet and its uncomfortable weather patterns. However, recent studies and reports have shown that we are not so independent as we would like to think. From the way we think to the way we act, it is in many ways dependent on our planet, our weather, our climate, and in ways that we would never have believed.
Well, I mean, there's some very direct impact. I mean, we step outside, we get wet if it's raining. I mean, there's some very, very strong linkages. Increasingly, people are looking to broader things like agriculture being a key linkage between people and their environmental systems, that we can't grow our food or collect our food unless we have stable environmental systems.
My name is Juanita Constable, and I am a senior advocate in NRDC's Climate and Clean Energy program. I work mostly at the federal level to connect the dots between climate change and human health, and to advance solutions that both cut climate changing pollution and help people respond to the present day harms of climate change. When people think about power plants or cars, they intuitively understand that the pollution that comes from smokestacks and tailpipes is problematic, but they don't really realize that there's this whole other dizzying array of health threats, biological beings that are very much tied to what's happening around us. So I'm just deeply concerned that we're not ready for those impacts and aren't really comprehending the huge challenge we're up against.
When I was growing up, this was all quite theoretical. All this stuff about, cutting down rainforest and climate change and things like that was all something that might be going to happen in the future. And I think now it's all actually happening. Mm-hmm. So if anything, it's all the more imminent.
The most direct threat is extreme heat. As temperatures rise and heat waves get longer and more intense, we face a heightened risk of a whole range of heat-related illnesses. So there's the ones people have heard about, like heat exhaustion or heat stroke, which is a medical emergency that often leads to death. Extreme heat can actually harm you in a lot more ways. It can damage our kidneys. It can lead to heart attacks and strokes. It can make it harder to breathe. And heat is actually the number one cause of extreme weather-related deaths in the U.S., more than hurricanes or some of these other more catastrophic ones that people think about. Well, rising temperatures can speed up the formation of smog, which is a powerful asthma trigger. And most of us know at least one person in our lives that has asthma or COPD or other related lung diseases that are sensitive to smog.
People were cautioned if they had asthma or any respiratory problems not to go out on days when the pollution was, had a high degree of pollutants in the air.
That has to have mental health implications. There are definitely traditional understandings of how environmental systems can affect mental health much more directly. So there's lots of evidence that crime goes up when weather gets hotter, for instance. And so that potentially indicates some sort of connection with mental health, that people behave in different ways during hotter weather. And so there is some concern that climate change may lead to changes in not only crime patterns, but also in just how people interact with one another.
Police departments around the world have known for years that crime is heavily affected by weather patterns and temperature. In the warmer days during the summer, crime is significantly higher, especially violent crimes, than during the winter. And even during the cold months of December and January, crime increases, on relatively warmer days. Mental health is in many ways directly tied to both temperature and precipitation. A study from the National Academy of Science showed that when temperatures are in an excess of 30 degrees Celsius, or there is an abundance of rain, the probability of mental health problems increases significantly, potentially affecting up to 2 million people in the United States.
We know that people's mental health is tied into the stability of their systems, and I would say that it's going to be this disruption to people's to the norm that's going to be most stressful for people. The disruption leading to potentially conflict and political unrest and conflict over resources and things, and I think that has to have mental health implications.
There's this whole emerging body of work finding what's called ecological grief, where people's landscapes are slowly changing or their livelihoods are slipping away because of shifts in temperature, or in big parts of Colorado, there's vast swaths of the hillsides that are ravaged by bark beetles, and homeowners are having to make choices about whether to try and sell their homes. The most important thing I think everyone should be doing to engage on climate change, whether it's about reducing the pollution that's causing climate change or preparing for the threats that we're already facing, is to demand action from policymakers. And that requires, unfortunately, not just a one-off going to the polls, but it also means regular civic engagement. Second, I think it's important for people to understand what they face in their own backyards in terms of day-to-day weather and climate hazards. And that's particularly true if people have conditions like asthma or heart problems that make them more susceptible to things like heat waves and bad air. So it's important for sensitive populations in particular, but I think everyone to sign up for weather alerts from their local government or their preferred weather app to make sure that they're in the know about potentially hazardous conditions.
Much as we may try to deny and ignore it, humanity is not outside Mother Nature's influence. We continue to be tied intrinsically to changes in our weather and our climate. While the final effects are still somewhat unknown, Helen Hazen has some good advice for us in the meantime.
I think I would say be hopeful, because it's pretty easy to get pretty depressed and then we fall into a sort of paralysis of not doing anything because it's all so hopeless and it's all so bleak. Each of us can make a little bit of a difference, and no big things are going to change until lots of little things change.